Right. I've been listening to you, Fergus, for a while there. I worry about the family farm in Ireland with some of the comments you have said, for the simple reason it seems to be a race to the bottom and no one minds what happens. But if a group of farming organisations decide to come together with the members that they represent, and it was spoken about earlier on by Ms Goggin that generally things are roughly the same price, that if the apples are 2 cents more or whatever, someone won't buy them. So if the meat is the same price that the factory is quoting, and the representatives that people have signed up to goes in to negotiate, you cannot do it. This is what has come out. And I just cannot fathom that, because they have an authority from being members of the association to represent them no more than we have as public representatives. And then at the same time, you talk about competition, and you think of the name Competition Authority. We have now a situation in this country that there's 3 or 4 large operators at the meat industry because they've been let merge. And I'm a contractor, right? I'm a contractor for my living. And when I go bailing, I'll put it simple to you now, I cannot charge the price I want, because if there's 10 bailers around my area, I have to make sure that I'm competitive. But if there's 2 or 3 and we're all mad busy, well, who's to stop me from charging more? And ye have let the meat industry, over the number of years, come down through mergers by not keeping control on it. And over the last 10, 15 years, have ye ever looked, because I'll tell you the dog on the street knows this, that there is a big fear out there among communities. It's in everyone's lips. What's going on in the whole meat industry in Ireland? And as a competition authority, did ye ever bother going, seizing computers, taking all the gear? My understanding is on the insurance, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it was a European outfit, is that right, that came into Ireland to check the insurance?
There's both a national and a European level.
Yeah, but was it European?
Both.
Yeah. Well, it was reported as European. Why aren't we doing that in this country, where there is suspicion, or maybe it's unfounded, but why aren't we investigating those things? Second of all, you talked about the big operator and the smaller operator. Do you ever look at procurement? For the simple reason, and you mentioned it earlier on, Fergal, that some small operator, at the moment the national parks are doing, they're giving out contracts or doing procurement for re-wetting peatlands. But a guy with 1 digger that has a laptop and maybe bad coverage, compared with some civil engineering contractor that has people working for them, is at a distinct disadvantage. But they're not let into the game, and this is the way the procurement road has gone. But nothing has been looked at. I see where you have looked at POs, but I want you to address why. At the last thing, you can talk about bonuses, you can talk about everything. And it was unusual to see how exercised ye got when a farmer was trying to get a fair price. As again before that, there wasn't a word about things. I noticed that you also said you met different farmer or different organisations. Did you meet MII, for example? On top of that, Deputy Carroll pointed out, I'm a farmer in the west of Ireland. I can't go into Glanbia. I can't be sure of getting €4. I don't know. There's a farmer that I won't be buying a calf of. Why is the competition loaded against me because of where I live compared with some other parts of the country? And you're not going to look at that, from what I understand. that Deputy Cahill highlighted, even though he was of the understanding that it wasn't fully legit what was going on. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of people out there, and go to the agricultural community, they've lost faith in you. They talk about the Competition Authority, they don't want to hear about it, because they've absolutely discussed it in the last month or 6 weeks, rightly or wrongly. I'm not accusing you of something, of what's gone on. You talked about more powers. Where do you see the more powers that will work? And then you talked about, and we'll go back to the carrots that Mary talked about. You said you'd have to look at it if they were going out of business. But if the small person, if something goes below cost, if something goes below the price of production, what's going to happen? The conglomerate is going to go the distance. Have you looked at feedlots, for example? Have you looked at the VAT situation in feedlots that there's legislation here for? Where it's alleged at the moment, and the chicken industry has talked about it, that inflated prices are going on. Have you looked at those things? Because agriculture is at a crossroads at the moment. And what has come out over the last few weeks from both ye, in fairness to farmer organisations, we're trying to go in. If I'm talking to 5 people that are getting €10 for something and they're going to make €2 profit and they're all going to give €8, I just can't understand how I cannot discuss that with them in the line of a base price. It's not price fixing, it's price reality. It's price necessity and it's price survival. And ye have it was the greatest farce ever. You can give a bonus to someone, like if you were working and you were a great worker, well, we'll give you a bonus at Christmas. Or it's like the employer not being able to talk to the employee and say, or the employee going in and saying, I want more money. And there's a disgust out there being quite honest about it. And I would like to know what more powers can give ye the teeth that's required to dig into some of these large conglomerates, because we are now at risk of 80 to 100,000 family farms over the mess that's going on. And to be quite blunt about it, you're no addition to it.
Okay, so we're going to let whichever of you want to come back. There's a lot of statements there.
Well, if I might just start, Chairperson, thank you. I mean, first of all, I think it's really, really important to say that the criminal enforcement powers that we have are extremely strong and they require absolute justification to be used. We cannot go and use those powers to do a fishing expedition in any company, and those are the rights that are guaranteed to individuals and companies by the rule of law and by the Constitution. That if we are to go and get a search warrant to search a company to seize evidence, we need to go before a judge and we need to swear that we have reasonable grounds to believe that there is evidence located there. And we're not going to do it without that. And I'm happy to say that none of the staff would do it and the judge wouldn't give us a warrant if we didn't have reasonable grounds. So where do you get the reasonable grounds? In a criminal prosecution, as Fergal was saying earlier, you get them from witness evidence. Now, we have had several people come to us and we have done a lot of work in working with those people, trying to get them to encourage them to come forward, trying to get them to the point. And we were talking about very experienced investigators that we have on the staff. We've deliberately recruited a number of ex-guards. We have a detective sergeant from the Garda Bureau of Fraud Investigation seconded to us. So these people know how to work with witnesses and they know how to question them. But what I have to tell you now is that nobody has ever brought us to the point in relation to this industry where we could validly go and look for a warrant. Now, none of these things are closed. We're always, as my colleagues have said, our door is always open. People can come in and talk to us and we're willing to listen to anybody at any time, but we need somebody that is going to bring us to that point if any further action is going to be taken. In terms of...
In relation to the chicken industry, didn't I come forward to give you substantial evidence and nothing has happened?
In relation to
the chicken industry.
To what specifically?
The chicken industry.
I do not believe that we would have not taken steps if substantial evidence had been brought forward. But you know, what we mean by substantial evidence might be different to different people. We have had people come to us and claim that they have given us substantial evidence when what they gave us was a newspaper report of a press release that they had issued. That's not evidence. So what we need is actual witness evidence of people on the ground having seen something untoward that could constitute a crime and being willing to speak about it. So I just feel that I need to say that in defence of due process and in defence of the way that we operate, because we cannot go on fishing expeditions, carrying out raids and abusing our powers in a way that would be completely unlawful and unconstitutional and detrimental to our mission. In relation to some of the other issues on procurement, we certainly look at public procurement. Was it procurement in general that you were looking at?
But I've seen it in the last week, but this is only one example. There's several examples of the mouse against the elephant, to put it quite blunt about it. And I've seen one with the national parks, and I'm not blaming the national parks. They're doing the system that's there. But if you're a small operator for re-wetting a bog with one machine, and you live in the back of beyonds and you don't have broadband, and you have to go through all this process and tick all these boxes on a procurement process, you're at a huge disadvantage compared with the big person that mightn't have a bull's clue about it, but because they have someone within an office that's able to do all the fancy stuff, have the good broadband, they'll win the contracts. And it's actually, to be honest about it, it's costing more money to the state what's going on in the procurement process, even though people thought it was the greatest idea ever.
Sorry. There would be cases going back, where we would have certainly encouraged procuring authorities to see if they can break up the lots in some way, like rather than doing one huge big lot that only a small number of people. But this is very much from our point of view in the interest of promoting competition, not just for this survey, for this round of procurement, but to make sure it's there again the next time, so that you don't get just one single operator hoovering up all the business, but that you can ensure that people are there to go the next time.
I'll give you an example.
Just leave Ms. Godwin.
Can I have one more example, please?
No, you can come back in a second, okay? Mr. O'Leary.
If I might add as well, no, it's absolutely an issue in terms of the disadvantage that a small player will be versus a big one in a tendering process. So we are on the OGP SME group. What we're trying to do in that work is to make sure that everybody has a chance. And to make sure that, I suppose, it's a little bit more rebalanced in favour of small and medium-sized enterprises, which to allow them an opportunity to tender for public procurement, and that's something that we are working on as part of that group.
Yeah, just to clarify, we have received over 170 complaints very, very recently. So if the matter that you mentioned there in relation to I think it was chicken feedlots is part of that, then that's something that we'll be working through. So we will consider all those complaints and we will work through them. I think it's important to clarify in relation to the letter from the Beef Plan Movement and the work that we do and how we go about it. We did write a letter. The letter was to highlight potential concerns around anti-competitive behaviour. It also highlighted the risks that they were taking, and it is the type of letter that we send as standard to try and get compliance. It wasn't an enforcement letter, and it also highlighted the option that they would have to become a producer organisation. So back to your point about that the farmers can't get their representative and go in and negotiate. If they're in a producer organisation, then they can negotiate with that processor. So that's what it allows them to do. And again, that was we were pointing out in the letter that this exemption existed and that people like the Beef Plan Movement could look at that option.
The Beef Plan Movement, right, just to be clear. I am talking about that if every one of us here joins Fianna Fáil, right, which is highly unlikely for me, and they go to represent you at something, right, and if someone joins Fine Gael, right, and they go and they represent the people that want them to represent them, can they not go in, because of who they represent, and talk about the price, because they're representing people?
So if they are a producer organisation, which is a Big Plan Movement.
But forget about the producer. I'm talking about a farming body.
Yes. So
like, if you want to go down to a producer thing, it's no different, to be quite frank about it, because if I join a farming organisation, I'm joining them because I believe they'll do something for me, right? And if they have 20,000 members or 50,000 members, can they not collectively, because they have all of the farmers in the country, there are a few, collectively, because not everyone will join a producer organisation either, can they not collectively go in and talk to bean that we spoke about earlier on, the apples that we'll go back to at the same price in Moore Street, and if the beef is the same price roughly, why can't we go in and talk about base price?
So, if they are a producer organisation and they have that exemption, they can. So, back to our letter was an effort to highlight concern and to highlight this option that there is out there. So those farmers can come together, get the exemption as a producer organisation, and go into that process.
Can you explain to me why I can't do it as a farmer organisation when I'm representing the same people that might be in a producer organisation?
So the organisation can apply for an exemption as a producer
No, you're not listening. You're not listening to what I'm saying.
No, I think in fairness, it's not that he's not listening, but I think you're you're saying in order to go in and make the point, you have to be a member of producer, and you have to be a member of a producer organisation.
Yes.
And what's the difference between a member of the producer organisation? Yes. If Anne sets up a producer organisation and Anne has a membership to be in our club without being in the thing, what's the difference that the farming organisation, when they go into talks with factories or whatever, cannot talk about base price? But by the way, if they open a producer organisation and calls it Joe Blogs, they can go in to the same place, the same people, and talk about the same thing.
So there were certain criteria set out in order to qualify to be a producer organisation, and they're detailed on the Department of Agriculture's website. So it's not just anybody becomes a producer organisation. You have to meet certain criteria, and the argument was that agriculture was special. It needed an exemption from competition law, and that argument was accepted, and that exemption was set out. And the requirements as to why that certain organisations would be trying to achieve certain things, such as an increase in efficiency, which is one of the goals of a producer organisation, that they could therefore get an exemption from competition law. And importantly, to your point, they can go in and negotiate with that processor. So that option is available. As to why others haven't taken it up, I don't know, but one has. So I think this is the point. They can go in and they can negotiate.
Can I ask you one question? So, is there an obligation on the processor to engage with them? Because at the moment they're stonewalling them. So if you had a farmer organisation here, a group of them together, they may be boxed into a corner with what you're dealing with, that they had to discuss price for the simple reason there was a group of them together that represented most people in the country. But at the moment, if you have a PO, because cattle are plentiful, to put it bluntly, they won't engage with anyone because they're afraid they'd give them any bit of power. And it's a contradiction of what's going on.
So the meat processors cannot get together and they cannot agree the price amongst themselves as to what they're going to give to the farm organisations.
No, just give me a chance to answer now, please.
That would be a breach of competition law. The farmers can come together and have a producer organisation, and they can go and negotiate with the processor. The processors cannot. They have no exemption from competition law. They cannot do that.
Would you feel it? Would you think it's unusual that everywhere around this country today, that $3.45 is the price of a steer per kilo, and $3.55 is the price of a heifer? Would you find that unusual that in every processor in the country that there isn't a cent, 2 cents? Would you worry about it?
Again, back to Izal's point, there are a number of markets where prices come together, where the prices are transparent and where people can transport. If they see a better price, they can transport whatever it is to that point. And indeed, not just in the state, but they can transport internationally. So you do see markets where prices do all come into line, where those are transparent. I mean, so the idea that this is evidence that there is a cartel, I mean, it's not evidence that there's a cartel. We are happy to discuss with anyone the things that they see in the market, and we're always open to that. But the idea that this is evidence as a cartel, and therefore an investigation must be open, and the very strong powers that we have must be used, that's not how we'd see the market.
Sorry, if I could just add one thing, just to not lose sight of the point that you made first, Deputy, in that The 80,000 households and the fact that sustainability and viability is undoubtedly, I mean, we've seen most recently the report that the central bank did just before the ploughing, and that writ large the difficulties that are in the sector. Just what we constantly see in terms of our engagement with this sector is people are trying to solve the problems with competition law, and it's not the right tool to try and do that. And for that reason, what we're suggesting is, if you want to look at buyer power and you want to look at issues of sustainability and viability, and in the context of the Unfair Trading Practices Directive that's coming in, that's where you need something more. That's where you need something that gets involved with proper powers, and they range from, you know, information and advice to the ability to be able to request information from individual suppliers, all of the types of things that economic regulators have in other markets, such as Comreg or energy. That's not in place in the agriculture sector at the moment. And, you know, to address the problems that you're speaking about, you're looking at a very different set of powers to the ones that today we're responsible for.
Can I just refer back to, it was Deputy Deering, I think said it at the time, looking for a sector regulator. Is that exactly what you need to try and deal with these issues?
I mean, that's what we've been suggesting for the last couple of years, because in our analysis of the Unfair Trading Practices Directive that is coming, I think a lot of people are almost unanimously agreed that it won't address the problems that are present in the sector today, and therefore you're going to have to go that little bit further, possibly in terms of an ombudsman role or a mediation role, that kind of intervention. So for us, if the problems are the problems that we're speaking about in terms of buyer power, viability, sustainability, then the answers for us in terms of the Unfair Trading Practices Directive is in the area of a sectoral regulator.
Okay, thank you.